So, morning, Nat. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. We've never actually met before. We've not even spoke in person before, have we? So I only know little bits about your journey. Do you want to start by introducing yourself and telling me where it all began?
So I'm Natalie, and when I went to university, I made friends with various people, and one of them was a male who happened to be on the course that I was studying, and we were friends for about 4 years, and I thought I knew him, and then we started a relationship. Um, it was very intense in the very first bit, which I now know is called love bombing, but at the time I didn't have any idea about any of that. And within a few months I was pregnant, so we then ended up with this extra sort of complication in our relationship, and I felt terribly guilty because we were both sort of educated people who were wanting to do loads of stuff with our lives.
Yeah.
Basically, we had lots of plans and things, and we hadn't really talked about whether we were going to be in a long-term relationship either. And suddenly our lives changed, and I felt very responsible for that as a woman, that I'd not prevented that from happening. And I think that is probably where my downfall was, because suddenly I was feeling like I've got to do everything right. The odd comment from my family, which was like, you're not doing things properly if you don't get married and things like that. So there was social pressure as well.
Yeah.
And so we embarked on this relationship, we moved in together, and things never felt comfortable or right. There was always like a sort of like, well, are we going to be together forever kind of thing, and it kind of got unsaid and swept under the carpet. And there was a lot of what I've now learned is future faking as well. You know, oh yes, well you can have a year off for maternity leave, and then when we got to maternity leave it's like, we can't afford for you to be off. So I ended up working when my son was just 10 weeks old, which I was felt very resentful for, and then various other things that came in. So in my relationship there wasn't any physical abuse or sexual abuse or anything like that, which I think I would have just said, no, I'm not sticking around for this. It was all psychological, it was all financial, it was anything that I enjoyed doing. So I'm a nurse by background, really, really passionate about nursing, but he didn't want me to be a nurse because he could see that I was enjoying that in my life. So sort of creeping in and trying to control things that I was doing. So I had a very modest wardrobe. I'm not a particularly exhibitionist woman, and but if somebody else bought me a blouse for Christmas, he'd wait a few months and then he'd sort of start dropping hints that he really didn't want me to wear that blouse, and sort of try and he wanted to control my wardrobe. And he was very excited about me being promoted, but it wasn't because he wanted me to do well for myself, it was because he wanted to use my salary as well as his own salary for his own things. So we never managed to do the things that we wanted to do. Like I wanted to buy a house, we couldn't do that because he was always spending the money that I was earning, so I couldn't make any savings. And I'm naturally a saver as well, so I found that really, really frustrating because it didn't align with who I am. And things were really, really messy. And through all of this, he was always saying, well, I think I've got some sort of mental health problem. And he actually was diagnosed with a mental health condition before we got together. And then we'd been together about 6 or 7 years, and he was then diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And that's when I started to understand that what I'm going through is not actually okay. It's not. Before that I was thinking, oh, he's got this mental health condition, I was giving him all these concessions and things, and it wasn't until I got to that point where he's got a diagnosis and I looked at the criteria. I was given the criteria by his doctor and looked at it and went, oh, these are all like tick, 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 these are all the things that he is. And then I went through a process of trying to modify my behaviour so that I could make life easier for him, because he's got this condition, so it's really important that I do everything I can to support him. And what was happening was that I was losing myself more and more and more. I lost a lot of weight. I never felt hungry. I could feel myself eating and using the calories as I was eating, which is a really odd sort of sensation, but I kind of obviously you can't feel yourself using calories, but it felt like that to me, because I was just couldn't do anything to put the weight back on. And then incidentally, once I left him, I put on a lot of weight very quickly and came back to my normal weight, my healthy weight, within the space of about 3 months, and then stayed there. So that was clearly my healthy weight that I should have been at. So after 2 years of this trying really hard, I then got to a point where I just thought, this isn't going to work. And I then said, but we'd also had some conflict between us. We'd had the police out a couple of times for minor stuff, actually, but nevertheless, that meant that services, child protection and other people were starting to sort of like recognise that maybe something wasn't right here. And my job requires me to make sure that I've not got stuff like that going on in my world as well. It was putting my job at risk. And I was thinking about my long-term future, my son's long-term future, and what it was like for him to be exposed to what was increasingly toxic conversation, because I wasn't just being meek and mild anymore, I was standing up for myself more. And so that was meaning there was more conflict. And at some point I was talking to my dad, and I just said, please can I come and live with you? Originally I told my ex-husband that we were going to all move up there together to my dad's house, and he sort of didn't want to go to my dad's house and insisted on living somewhere else but nearby, which was good because it meant we were separate. And then about 4 months after we separated, he started to talk about us getting back together again. Like, he thought that we'd been just trying to avoid services and lie low for a few months, because that's what I'd led him to believe, but I knew that wasn't what I wanted. So once I told him that I don't love you and I'm quite enjoying not being with you and I feel better in myself, he was very, very quick to then go back to where we used to live, which was where he had family. But it didn't stop there, because he continued through our son to try and upset and cause difficulties. So there's been a lot of post-separation stuff, resulting in eventually our son actually made false allegations against me, where he seems to actually believe that normal parenting is bad and abusive, and has actually cut off from me because he believes, he's been led to believe that ordinary stuff like getting you to clean your teeth is abuse.
So when you separated, did you have shared care then?
Not exactly, because he had a mental health diagnosis and he wasn't in a good place. We'd had some incidents, about 6 months before I left, he'd bought a crossbow and he tried to keep this crossbow under the bed, and our son was only 5 at the time. He was showing our son how to use this crossbow, and I was really scared about it, and I rang his mental health provider the following morning, after we'd had this in the house, and said, I'm really, really concerned that we've got this weapon in our house. And they sent the police round, and the police took it. So when we'd had sort of like things like that had happened, I was advised that it's not really okay to sort of do 50-50 as it was, and I was told at the time to do supervised contact just while his mental health was reassessed, which was done in our new location. But I don't think he ever really got properly supported by that's the other thing, there's not enough mental health support.
No.
So at that point I'd sort of said, well, you can see our son every fortnight and I'll come. So I was going round to stay while he was having contact to make sure that it was all okay. But the longer you're apart from somebody, the less confident you can be about what somebody's mental health is like. So I wasn't able to explain it to people. You can't say, well, 5 years ago such and such happened, and but today he might be absolutely fine. So it's been a real battle trying to get services to understand when I've had concerns.
At that point, what services were involved?
So at that point, it was just mental health services.
Right. So when did social care and family court start? And
so the social care was involved originally when we were living together, and I went into school and said, my husband has told our son that he's going to kill himself in October. So we were in the summer at that point. So he was actually telling our son, who was only 5 at the time, I'm going to be killing myself. And I said, this isn't right, it's going to do him damage. So then that sort of precipitated my leaving, because it was the next few months, and realising that services weren't going to swoop in and just make everything better. There was no magic wand. I'm going to have to do this myself. So then I left. And then what happened was I've ended up with social services back involved at various points because of false allegations. So one time, and these usually coincide with, because I've got a current husband who's absolutely lovely to me. So there is life after abuse as well. Yeah. That's a good thing to remember. Yeah. But when we first started seeing each other, when I moved in with him, and also when we got married, allegations came up again. Yeah. And so every time that's precipitated another set of allegations, which has meant social services have then had to do an assessment. And then each time they've closed it down again afterwards, but they've got to do their bit. But yeah, we've had periods where they've been interested in what we've been up to.
Yeah. So did you ever end up in family courts then?
Yes. So when my son was about 9, so we separated when he was nearly 8, and my ex-husband was having regular contact with him because he moved in with his own family then. So I felt like there were people around to have him, and it wasn't appropriate for me to supervise, but I knew that he would get support, and I trusted them. And so he was having regular contact, but he still felt the need to take me to court, and he really, really wanted his friends to come along and slate me, basically. I think he thought it was going to be like a public gallery, and it's nothing like that. So it literally was the judge, him, me, my current husband, because we didn't have any legal representation, and the judge was very clear that what we were doing was okay. We put some extra sort of little support in, because there were things like he was demanding that he needed to sleep with our son, and he wanted to have baths with him and stuff like that, which when they're 2 is fair enough, but when they're 9 it's not really appropriate. So there were a few little extra things that were put in, but essentially our contact stayed the same, so it didn't make any difference at all to that. And it was noted that there was a lot of conflict between the two of us, but my side of the conflict was me not backing down, because I've got to put boundaries in. You're talking about somebody, if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. So I have to be really sort of black and white with my boundaries with him. And when I've said, no, I'm not going to do something, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to change my mind. Because I've been talked down so many times before. He just wears you down until you say yes. So no, I'm not doing that anymore. So yeah, when we went back to family court the next time, he'd actually already removed him from my care. So my son went off to school one day when he was 16, and he just never came home. And that was he just went to his dad's house. That was when the latest lot of allegations happened, and that's where we're at, really.
So you don't have any contact with your son at minute?
So I have indirect contact in that I send him letters, and I send him texts, and I send him emails, but he doesn't respond very often. He did text me at Christmas to say Happy Christmas, but I didn't hear from him on Mother's Day this year. No.
Do you fear that he's going to follow the same traits as his dad?
I think there's a risk, and I think a lot of my parenting over the years has been around trying to prevent him from being like his dad.
Yeah.
So I've been very aware from a very young age that that might be the case. He was very hostile and aggressive before he left, and that might be a sign that he's also got the same condition that his dad has.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that it's just a response to the abuse, because I understand that children in his situation with a parent who's got a narcissistic personality disorder often have like they've been coercively controlled throughout their childhood, and we concentrate on the mother or the father who is in the relationship, but we don't really concentrate on the children and think about the children are experiencing the same coercive control.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, he's got some growing to do yet. His brain's not fully developed and what have you. But I do hope in time that we will re-establish our relationship. But he certainly benefits from me sending him things, and he hasn't ever said, he's sort of said, oh, don't send me emails, but he's not said, don't send me gifts, don't send me letters or anything like that. And he's in contact with my sister. He's cut a lot of my family off now, but he's in contact with one of my sisters, and she says that he does benefit from me sending stuff to him.
In what way?
I think she recognises from what he said to her that he knows that I love him because I send that. I've not forgotten him, and I'm not hassling him. I'm not making him call me. I could turn up on his doorstep and be really demanding, and I'm not. I just send him the odd thing, you know.
So is he 16 now?
He's 19 now.
Right. And did you have any more children?
I wasn't able to have any more children.
Right. So he's your only son?
Yeah.
So basically you're just kind of hoping and praying that he comes back one day?
Yeah.
And is that what you want? Is that how you feel that it's the only way to move forward with everything, is to keep that indirect contact and doing what you're doing?
Yes. I think the important, because when it first happened I was just absolutely bereft, and it was like going through a bereavement.
Yeah, very much
going
so.
into his room and he's not there, but his belongings are all there and that sort of thing. And I had a few weeks off work. I just couldn't think straight and wasn't able to, because my job's a supportive role for other people, so I wasn't able to do that. But I built myself back up again, and realised that the best way for him is if I'm 100%, then it will be a lot easier for him to come back to me. I've done a lot of research into parents like in a similar situation to mine, and quite a lot of them will end up using drugs or alcohol to numb the pain, and while that's a really obvious and understandable thing for people to end up doing, it's actually not beneficial to a child to then have an addicted parent potentially, or I mean, obviously that doesn't happen to everybody, but it just adds. And there are lots of, I mean, I don't know how many women, but there's a sizable number of men who just will kill themselves, who are in that situation, and that's also not beneficial for children.
No.
Because they need to know that you're there to come back to.
Yeah.
So I just sort of focused on that and thought, right, I'm going to have to get on top of this somehow.
What's your view on domestic abuse from a professional opinion? From how you see that families are trapped by social care and CAFCAS and other professionals, what's your opinions around all that?
So I think there are lots of really well-meaning people who are trying really hard to do the right thing by children, but I also think there are, and I think there are some people who are just turning up to work every day who just think, oh, I'm getting paid. Here's a tick box. Because I know children who are looked after where the social worker will turn up and just say, well, I've got to do this visit every month, so I'm doing this visit, and then they will say, you know, the person who's the foster carer will say, well, I need support with such and such, and can't necessarily get that support that they need. But the social worker's turning up every month and ticking the right boxes, so it looks like they're being supported. So but obviously there are some really, really good social workers as well. I'm not saying that every social worker fits into that box. But I also think there's a problem with money in the system. So the people who work for CAFCAS often they get paid based on results. Solicitors definitely. It's a tug of war, isn't it, between two parents, and not really about what's the best interest of the child. And the best interest of the child is to have both parents in their life. And sometimes that means having a parent who needs to be supervised because they're not quite, things are not okay at the moment, and it also means making those hard decisions when, if you have got a violent parent or a sexual abuser, that actually those parents shouldn't have that contact. But it's the actual getting to know the families. I think they're overwhelmed. Services are overwhelmed by the number of children who are in this situation. It's so difficult to make those assessments and really, really get to know a family. I mean, my son's CAFCAS guardian was willing to come to court and make decisions about him without even having met our son. And
I hear that all the time. That happens all the time. Yeah.
And we actually said, well, we don't want to go to court next week unless you've seen him. And he had to make a special trip to his dad's house, because that's where he was at the time, to see him before we went back to court the following week.
How on earth can you make an assessment on a child that you've never met? How's that even possible?
And I think another problem is this reliance of the voice of the child, because the voice of the child, don't get me wrong, that's really, really important. If you've got a child who's saying, I've been sexually abused, and we ignore that child, that's really bad, and that's a real failure of services if we do that. But on the flip side, we've got to understand that children who are controlled coercively aren't necessarily going to be speaking with their authentic voice. So
what do you think the answer to it is? Because my opinion is that there is parents out there that will use children to as weapons, basically. We all know that they do that to still carry on that abuse and that control, but they just do it through the children. But I think how could they assess better? Because there is, children only learn from behaviours that they see, don't they? And what they're brought up in. So how could it be assessed better, do you think?
I think longer. There's a lot of information in psychology. I think that the training needs to be improved for a start, because a lot of people who work in safeguarding don't recognise that this kind of abuse goes on. And if you start talking about it, because I work in the NHS, and I find that I can be talking about it with people in safeguarding who will sort of dismiss what I'm saying, and they don't really know what it's about. They don't really recognise it, so it makes it very difficult for them to make decisions based on that. And I've found, as a sort of more junior member of staff to that senior person, that they'll sort of not recognise that I've got a different insight. It's been very much like, oh, if you can see something because you've experienced it, then you're bringing your personal life into it. And it's, well, no, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a pattern, a pattern I've experienced myself, but I've then done lots of research around, and I'm seeing this pattern with this family.
I think. Do you not think a lot of it is common sense as well? I think you know, there's a lot of things that you can see that are so transparent that to me it just is common sense. You know.
But it's about people noticing. I mean, when I said before that I didn't realise I was being abused when I first was in that relationship, I didn't, because I'd always been told abuse is hitting you over the head, or
Yeah, yeah. And that's a perception we need to change, isn't it? Because even now we're in 2024 and it still has that perception, doesn't it? When actually coercive control and emotional abuse and mental abuse is the worst form. You could ask majority of women that, and they would all confirm that it is the worst form of abuse that you can experience.
and it comes with all of them, doesn't it? Because you don't ever just get one type of abuse on its own; you get several together.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. But when my son left, and I contacted the police and said I'm really concerned that he's being coercively controlled by his father, and the person who came round said, well, I'm really sorry to hear your story, but I can't do anything with this. He said, I don't know anything about mental health, and I don't think you've got enough evidence to be able to take it any further. So, and by that time social care had failed him, and the courts had failed him,
Yeah.
and then the police failed him as well. And it's tricky because you've got a young person sort of saying, well, that's what happened, and I'm actually safer not being with my mum.
Yeah.
But when you know, because you've lived in that same household, then it's tricky, because you sort of you're banging your head against a brick wall. But I think we've got to start recognising that not all abuse fits the same pattern all the time. That there's different. Everybody's got their own unique story, so there may be themes and patterns and what have you. But actually, everybody's got their own unique story, but it's actually identifying who the victim is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It can be quite tricky.
Yeah. It is, but I think most would agree that they are being failed by this current system, which is the reason why I wanted to do these podcasts, to get the reality out there, to get it exposed, because unless voices are heard properly, that aren't edited, they are real life, this is happening, then how can anything change? Because I think majority of people wouldn't have a clue to the reality of what's going on unless they've lived through it.
Yeah.
So I think we've just got to keep doing these podcasts, more and more voices heard, and just get that awareness out there. And I just want to say thank you very much for speaking to me, Natalie. It's been lovely to meet you, and I'm sure we'll speak again. Take care. Thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.